Hiya Hive. This is Melissa, digitizer behind designsbylittlebee.com. I want to do a quick video to explain a font that I'm releasing today because it has a little bit of a difference in the native file that I'm sending you, which is for use with Embrilliance Essentials software. I am not a fan of disclaimers like, sorry my office is messy, or sorry my hair isn't done, or anything like that. Because look, it just is what it is when it comes to videos. And you guys aren't here for me or my office or my hair or my makeup or my teeth. You are here to learn about Embrilliance or digitizing or machine embroidery. But today, I do want to give a disclaimer because this is really bugging me. For the past 2 weeks, my family has passed around, every member of the family has had some kind of sinus or respiratory infection thing. It's been terrible. And I feel so much better. You can probably tell by my eyes, I'm real clear and alert and I feel really good. But unfortunately, my voice and my throat don't really have that message yet. And I feel like I still sound like nasally and kind of bubbly. So I feel good. I'm ready to teach you something or show you something today. So if you don't hear anything that offends you in my voice, then great. I hope you enjoy the video. And if you do, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get better as fast as I can. I'm drinking lots of water and eating healthy foods and everything. And I hope to sound better and more clear very soon. So with that said, on to the video. I'm gonna record my screen and show you what I have to say about this great new font at designsbylittlebee.com. All right, y'all, I'm gonna try to make this video as short and sweet as I possibly can because ain't nobody got time to watch a 30-minute video about one font. I've been working on a satin column version of a Varsity font. That's like the varsity style letters that you might see on a letterman's jacket or in college or athletics. And as I was finishing it up, I realized that the discrepancy between the width of the stitches for the letters as small as ½ inch. Yes, there's a 0.5 inch version included with this font. And up to the 2 inch made this font, I want to say, impossible. And look, I know when I say this that I am not the be all end all of digitizing. There may be a way to do this that I don't know. But for me, as someone who has been digitizing for over a decade, this was the best way to save this font as a native file. So I'm going to go ahead and bring the font up on my screen so that I can show you what I'm talking about as I describe it. So I'm not just yapping my trap. Here is the Create Letters button. This is in Embrilliance Essentials. Now I do have other buttons up here that you might not have. For example, the Create, that's Stitch Artist, which is the digitizing module of Embrilliance. If you don't have that, it's because you don't use Embrilliance to digitize. That's okay. We're focused right now on this Create Letters button, which is probably the main reason why you bought Embrilliance Essentials, because of these BX fonts and being able to type out your letters with ease. So I clicked on it and it gave me ABC in this block font, which it is, you can see that the letters are in this lavender color. That's because these letters came with my Embrilliance Essentials module of Embrilliance software. Okay, this was built in. You buy Essentials and you get this great font. There are other ones that you also. So I also have hundreds and hundreds of fonts, some that I've downloaded from other places, some that I digitized myself. I'm going to click on this box down here where it's giving me the choice of fonts. And I'm actually going to just start typing in Varsity, VAR, because that is the font that I know I want to use. So instead of scrolling through hundreds of fonts, I just went to V for Varsity, okay? And you're going to see 2 Varsity fonts right here. This is what you're going to get in your folder. Don't pay attention to any other font in this screen right here, okay? These are the only 2 you need to be looking at. So these are the 2 fonts that will come with your Varsity font if you purchase it from me, designsbylittlebee.com. So the first one you see says Varsity font, and there's a less than sign, and then it says 1.25, and then DLB, which is Designs by Little B. So this is the Varsity font. If you were going to use approximately 1.25 inches or less, that's why the less than sign is there, okay? So I'm gonna click on that. Now you can see down here from our selected, this is the size of what you have selected on your screen. So the selected object on my screen is 2 1/16 inch wide and 1 inch tall. So that is how these letters are going to come to you if you click on the Varsity font less than 1.25 inch. It will come to you in a 1 inch size. Now, because this is a native font, in Embrilliance Essentials, you can do this, you can make it smaller, all the way down to the size that I have this font programmed to go down to, which is, look at the bottom, 9/16 of an inch. Okay, that's more or less 1/2 inch or 8/16 of an inch. Sometimes you will see a like 1/16 inch discrepancy in the size that you think it is. That is usually for push or pull compensation. And that's a whole nother video, so don't worry about it. For all practical intents and purposes, this is a 1/2 inch right here, okay? And that is the smallest that I have told Embrilliance that you can make this font. Because in my professional opinion, I don't think that you can make it much smaller than that without having the stitches, the columns being too thin, and it's going to just chew up your fabric. It's not going to stitch out. It's just so way too thin. So that is my professional opinion. If you don't agree, you can go and digitize your own letters with 1 millimeter wide satin columns, and that is your prerogative. But for me, I try to do what I think is best, and what I think is best is 1/2 inch is pretty much as small as I'm gonna go. So let's see what that means, and let's see what I mean by the length or width of the satin stitches. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to click on Stitch Simulator. It's one of my favorite buttons in Embrilliance Essentials because I feel like it allows you kind of a behind the scenes view of what you're stitching out. It shows you each step as it stitches through the design, and you can see like, what was the digitizer doing here? How wide are these stitches? How long are the stitches in this bean stitch, for example? So I really love the Stitch Simulator. It gives you kind of a little bit of a background or some information, like what was the digitizer thinking when they did this? Well, they told it to stitch out this way because clearly they thought it would be best this way. So I'm going to grab the little square of or rectangle of my Stitch Simulator, and I'm just gonna start going across. So first it's going to do some underlay, and this center bar of the A has some stitches in it that are a little bit diagonal, so I don't want to use that one as my gauge for what I'm doing. I'm going to start at a part of this letter A that is a perfect rectangle, so none of these stitches are like slanted. So here's what I'm gonna do. I went through the underlay, it went back and forth a little bit, gave some underlay, which is great. And now you can see that it is stitching one of the feet, if you will, of this letter A. And you can see that my Stitch Simulator, which will show where the needle's gonna go, is going up, down, up, down, up, down. This is the satin stitch of the letter. We're past the underlay, and this is the actual satin stitch. So if I go up here where it says length, right under my Stitch Simulator, this says 2.1 millimeters. Now this is important. As a person who is doing machine embroidery, you really do need just a little bit of working knowledge or background knowledge of stitch length, especially when it comes to applique, because you're tacking fabrics down, like the edge of fabrics, and you don't want a thin satin, right? So you want to know how wide is that satin stitch. Similarly, when you're stitching a font or you're stitching like a name that's composed of letters, you want to know, especially if you're in your Embrilliance Essentials software and you are editing that font or making it bigger or smaller, you need to check, you must check before you put that font or that word or that name into your machine to make sure that those satin stitches, the stitch width or length that's going across that branch of that letter or that piece of that letter is wide enough and also not too wide so that it will stitch sensibly. Here's what I mean. In my personal opinion, I really hate to do satin stitches on an embroidery machine, depending on the fabric, of course, but a good rule of thumb for me personally, and this is my personal opinion and you can disagree with it, I find that 2 millimeters is like my minimum. Okay, I do not want a satin stitch going on a fabric that is like 1.4 millimeters wide. In my opinion, that is just too thin. And once you take into account pull compensation, if you know what that is, it's actually gonna be even thinner. So when I say 2 millimeters is my minimum, that's actually gonna come out just fractions of a millimeter narrower than 2 millimeters because you've got to account for pull compensation. I've got a whole video about pull compensation. I will put it up in the corner of this video. Maybe I'm pointing even though you can't see my face. So if you don't know what pull compensation is, you can go watch that video if you're interested. If not, don't worry about it. Just keep watching. So here you can see in this length, 2.1 millimeters. And I'm gonna keep going to make sure that that's a general assumption or a good median of how wide these satin stitches are for these letters. You can see sometimes it'll say 2.2, sometimes it'll say 2.1. That is fine. A fraction of a millimeter is not going to make a difference. So now I'm going to go to the next column of this A. Oh, there it is. And look, we're still up here in length. Now it goes 2.2, 2.3, 2.2, 2.3. Still great. Still totally fine. Okay, so that is the length that we are dealing with this 1/2 inch font in the Varsity lettering. So I went over here to my select objects button and I clicked that. That made the stitch simulator go away, just FYI. Okay, now I want to see how large does this font, how much can we increase it? So I am going to undo my embiggening of the letters and I am going to select this word, or ABC, I don't guess that's a word. And I am going to, take it as wide, as big as Designs by Little B or the digitizer has told me I can safely resize this font. So do you see how wide those satin stitches are? Because just like there is a minimum for satin stitching, there's also, honestly and technically, a maximum. And while the minimum for the satin column length is a bit of an opinion, as I said earlier, the length of the satin stitches when you talk about the maximum lettering size, it's a function of what your machine will stitch out. If you get past a certain length for a satin stitch, sometimes your software will create a little ditch in the middle of your satin column, if you've ever seen that before. Now, this font that I'm showing you right now, it says less than 1.25 inches. So I put in this font in my instructions, I don't let it go bigger than that. Do you see that on the screen? If you go down to the bottom, it says 1 3/8. Again, that is approximately 1 1/4 inches. I told Embrilliance software, do not let them resize it any bigger than that. But if you were to bring in a letter maybe in another format, like not the native font, I think you could kind of just resize it willy-nilly, I think. If you do have that ability, this is something that you need to keep in mind. When you resize it so much that your length of your satin stitches are, let's say, 10.2 millimeters, your software, depending on which software it is liable to create a ditch in that satin column so that it doesn't go 10.2 millimeters. It's going to split that satin column and drop a stitch in the middle of the satin column because your software is telling you, hey, 10 millimeters is huge for a satin stitch. I'm not doing that. I'm going to help you out by creating a split in that satin column. There's also the possibility that depending on what software you use and what machine you're using, if you resize a satin column way too much and your software and or your machine are totally mad at you for doing that, it might not even stitch that part of the satin column. I've seen this happen in, for example, cursive letters that have a really wide part of them and then it goes to a more narrow part. And a person has brought over to their machine, let's say a name, and when their machine got to a certain part of the name or one of the letters that has a really wide column that the machine is like, no, I will not do this, it actually just skips those stitches entirely. And I've seen so many posts in machine embroidery groups where the person is like, oh my gosh, I've stitched out this whole name and I walked away and I came back and entire chunks of the satin columns did not stitch out, total chunks of the letters. So the answer to not having a split column or your machine ignoring those satin columns altogether is, of course, to pay close attention to those satin columns and just how wide they're getting. So we're going to do the same thing that we did with the 1/2 inch. And we're going to go to Stitch Simulator. I'm going to drag this rectangle. I want to see that bottom foot of that letter A. What's the stitch length on those? Okay, here we go. 5.2, 5.2, 5.2 millimeters. Again, we're right here under the rectangle, okay? Under that Stitch Simulator. Now, when you're digitizing with Embrilliance Stitch Artist, the maximum stitch length of a satin stitch, that's just one line that goes across and it gives you your choice of width, is 6.0 millimeters. So because I'm using software that was made by some experts who have probably more experience, some of them even more experience than the time that I've been alive. They have all this experience in machine embroidery and they put on their satin stitches that the longest length they want you to do is 6.0 millimeters. So I have kind of taken that to heart in my digitizing. And when I'm digitizing a satin column, which again, I could make as wide as I want. But in my head, going by these experts that have given me that barrier on another stitch type, I go ahead and use that as my general rule of thumb too. I don't like to go past 6.0 millimeters. So as I'm going along this A, I'm going up to the leg, or the leg, and then it's like da 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 da. Now we see up here 5.3, 5.4, 5.3, 5.4. Great, perfect. That is the general size of the length of the stitches that are going to be in the letters of this font at 1 3/8 inch, which is approximately 1 1/4 inches. So now you're saying, Melissa, who cares? Why are you telling me this? Okay, I'll tell you why. Because when you were down here, again, I'm going to go back to select objects. When you were down here selecting your font that you want to create, you saw that you had two. Less than 1.25, and what the heck is that? Greater than 1.5. Now, this is not something I would call normal. It's not something I usually see. Usually when a digitizer gives you a native font, they just give you the native font. And they're not like, okay, don't make it bigger than this size. But this font is unique. And the reason that I call this font unique is because the satin stitches and the satin columns are so wide because of this varsity look. You want it to be bold and tough and athletic. Like, this is the varsity font. But then you also have to adhere to the rules of real life and real needles and thread and real fabrics that we're stitching on. So we have to be careful about those columns. So if I were to let you stretch this font to, let's say, 2.5 inches, holy crap, those satin columns, the length of those stitches are going to be what, 7.5, 8 millimeters, 9 millimeters maybe? They would be so long, you would definitely start experiencing weird things with the satin stitches of the larger letters. And even if you didn't, let's say it still stitched it out fine. And even if you didn't, let's say your machine stitched it out just fine. Have you ever heard an embroidery machine jumping across a large space for like a longer satin column? To me, it sounds terrible, and it's very labored stitching. And you also have to keep in mind that with longer satin stitches, that makes the possibility that these satin stitches will get snagged on something so much greater. Sometimes people say, well, what's the harm? And you're right, maybe what is the harm? But in my opinion, especially when it comes to a font like this, like a varsity font, you're probably going to stitch this on maybe a duffel bag, a Letterman jacket, a tote bag, something kind of official, something that someone is going to carry and use and show off. And so when it comes to items like that are not like heirloom items or something you're just going to display, in my opinion, it's best to use stitches that won't offer a high probability of being snagged or grabbed by something as you walk past it and tearing those stitches and completely destroying your hard work. Again, that's kind of a little bit of opinion, and you can take that for what it's worth. So with that said, let's go look at the lengths of these stitches on letters in this second version of this font that I've given you, that if you see, it says Varsity Font greater than 1.5 inches. Designs by Little B. Did you see what just happened there? I do offer the ability to resize even in these specific measurements of the fonts. But what I'm trying to do is just guide you and help you make sure that your letters have good, high quality lengths of those satin stitches. So let's go to the stitch simulator. Let's go down to length. See, this one is 1.25 inches. So first we're gonna look down here at the size. This is 1 3/8 inch tall. And we're going to go to stitch simulator. So see, that's smaller than 1.5. But I'm just making a point here to say that it's not hard and fast. I'm just trying to help. So if you see up here, our stitch lengths now are 3.2 millimeters, okay? And we're going to keep going with that, blah, blah, blah. We know they're about 3.2. So now I'm going to resize this font. Let's take it all the way up to looking at the height down there at the bottom right. I'm going to take it up to 2 inches. Now, if you were to use the font that I was using a minute ago, that version, these satin columns would be so huge, just like we talked about earlier. They would be, I don't even know how wide. 8 millimeters, 9 millimeters, they would be very wide. So to help you avoid 9, 10 plus millimeter satin columns, or the lengths of satin stitches, I created the second one. And look, at 2 inches tall, these satin stitches are 4.5 millimeters in length. In my opinion, that's a great length. So I feel like I said I'm gonna make this short and sweet as much as possible, and I feel like this is way too long already. I hope that you understood everything that I explained in this video. If you did not, please leave a comment. I do try to respond to my comments on YouTube, But since I have so many videos, I don't always see comments, especially if they're like from a video a year ago or even longer. So if you're asking a question that really, really needs a response, I highly encourage you to shoot me an email instead. I am available via email darn near any time. My email is designsbylittleb@gmail.com, and you can just say, hey, I didn't understand this. Can you clarify? And I'll do my best to help you personally. But the TLDR, or too long didn't watch or didn't listen version of this video, is that I have created 2 different native files for this one Varsity font, because in my opinion, it is best for your stitch out and the quality of your project if you use a different version for larger letters, because the satin column will not be ridiculously wide and give you all kinds of problems. And likewise, if you're stitching letters or editing letters to where they're very small, your software will not spit out letters that have 1 millimeter or even less length of stitches in those satin columns, which to me is just as disastrous, just in the different direction. I'm gonna wrap it up there. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. You can find this and many other fonts at designsbylittleb.com. I will see you in the next video, and I'll chat with you in the comments. Bye.